We're going to spend today and next week, because this is that Thanksgiving time of year, of opening the Bible and having us give guidance to what gratitude is, what thankfulness is. Because in the Bible, gratitude is a really big deal. And we're going to help the Bible help us understand why it matters so much and why it matters to God so much. So if you have a Bible in hand, we're going to look today at a story right near the front in a place called Exodus. It's a second section in. And when you get there, go to the spot in Exodus called number 16. I'll give you a chance to find that, and then I'll read the story for us. The book is called Exodus because it kind of describes the single biggest event of the Old Testament, which is the exodus of the Israelite people from Egypt. It says in verse 1, "The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin." Now, that has no theological meaning. It's simply taking the word in Hebrew, zin, and putting it into English. So it doesn't mean sin how we think of it. It's rather a name that they have for that region that just happened to be spelled in English, S-I-N. And this happened on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." So Moses and Aaron said to the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Moses said, "You know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. And who are we? You're not grumbling against us, but you're grumbling against the Lord." This is God's word. The context of that story, if you go on to the next slide, is this region here. That's what's called the Desert of Sin. It's in the Sinai Peninsula. And when they came out of Egypt, God led them directly into that area. And as you can see, nothing grows there that you can eat. Nothing's edible there. It's a desolate place. Nobody lives there except maybe some nomads who move from place to place. But that's where they are. And the people now begin to grumble and to complain. And it's in this story that we can see why gratitude matters so much to God, why he sees it as so important. So the first thing, if you go on to the next slide, that we see is that our complaining, or their complaining, completely wiped out their past. That's one of the things complaining does. And it shows up here in the text. It shows it wiped out what God did for them in the past, and it wiped out what their past had been like in Egypt. So it wiped out what God had done for them. It says, "These things took place on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt." So think with me for a minute. 15th day of the second month, which means they're about 45 days or 6 weeks from where they had been. They had been enslaved in Egypt for over 300 years, which is roughly 15 generations. They were enslaved, their parents were, their grandparents were, their great-grandparents were, their great-great-grandparents were. They were enslaved for going back to over 300 years. And within 6 weeks, they're complaining over what they're eating. They just don't like it. And I thought of an analogy, the best analogy I could think of. Suppose someone gets paroled from prison after being incarcerated for X amount of time, and now they have freedom. I volunteered at London Correctional Institute for about 8 years and was in and out of that prison over 50 times. And when you're in a prison, they tell you when to get up, when you can eat, when you can exercise, when you can go to the gym, when you can go outside, when the TV can be on, when the TV can't be on, when you have to go to bed, when lights are out. Everything about your life is scripted. And then you get paroled. And then no one's scripting your life. You can get up when you want. You can eat what you want. You can eat when you want. You can exercise when you want. You can watch TV whenever you want. You have freedom that you had never had in the institution. And imagine the person who's paroled, 6 weeks later, maybe they're invited to their parents' house for dinner or something like that, or at a friend's house. And they complain to themselves, gosh, the meatloaf isn't heated all the way through. And if any of us heard that or became aware of that, we would say to ourselves, have you lost your mind? 6 weeks before, you were eating whatever they said you could eat, whether it was hot or cold. And now you have freedom that you haven't known, and you're complaining because the meatloaf is lukewarm. And that's what's happening here to the Israelites. Their complaining has wiped out what God had done for them and giving them freedom that they hadn't had in 15 or more generations. It also wiped out, their complaining wiped out what their experience had been in Egypt. So they said, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. And if you read of their experience, you know that wasn't true. The Israelites were making building materials for Pharaoh, specifically sun-dried bricks. And they had to go out and find the straw to use as a rebar, so to speak, for the bricks, in addition to making the bricks. It wasn't a life of luxury. It wasn't we just sat around and ate meat and enjoyed it. It was drudgery. It was so bad that they begged God for deliverance. But now when they look back, their complaining has wiped out that experience, and they have reprogrammed their minds into thinking, we remember how good it was. As if those years of enslavement were the good old days. And God takes our gratitude seriously, because when we complain, it has this ability to wipe out the past and reinvent what it was in our minds. So that's the first reason why God takes it so seriously. There's a second reason. Let's go on to the next slide. And it's that despite their complaining, God was moving to give them what they were complaining about. So it says in verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down heaven from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them to see whether they will follow my instructions. So what he's describing is, as the people went to bed at night, God, as the dew would settle down on the ground, God would transform that dew into a flake-like bread that they could use for any kind of food, baking. It had the Bible describes it a flavor of honey. All they had to do is just go out and gather what they needed for that day. And he made a point of telling them, only gather what you need for that day. So don't be greedy. I'll make sure the next day you get what you need, and the day after that, just take what. And then he said, I'm going to have quail come in, and they're going to fly over the ground and hover down here a couple feet off the ground so you can grab them out of the air. So you'll have all the meat that you need. So he's promising them, I'll give you all the bread, I'll give you all the meat that you could possibly want to have. Just don't be greedy. Some of them did, though, got greedy, and they would gather more than they needed, thinking, well, what if we don't get manna tomorrow? Just in case. And those people among the Israelites who gathered more than their family needed at that point in time for that day, the Bible says overnight, maggots infested the bread and the meat. It just turned it awful. And God said, look, I told you, only get what you need for the day. I'll be there for you the next day. And here's the point here. This is to me, it's the most meaningful part of the story. Even as the Israelites were complaining, God was going about his work of getting them the food they were complaining they didn't have. When I was growing up, I was 9 years old. I first started collecting baseball cards. And that was 1963. And in fact, the first cards I remember getting were 1962. If anyone was collecting baseball cards back then, Post Cereal put baseball cards on the back of their cereal boxes. And if you happen to have an unopened Post Cereal box with the baseball cards over it, that's worth thousands of dollars. Well, in 1964, I had, I don't know, easily 1,000 baseball cards. And that year was the only year when I was collecting baseball cards where they didn't put a stick of gum in the packet. They used to have these flat sticks of gum about an inch wide, about 3 inches long, and it would break apart when you tried to chew it because it was so stale, and the flavor lasted about 2.5 seconds. That one year, 1964, instead of putting gum in the baseball packs, they put these little aluminum coins like this. They published 164 of them, so they were repeated in the packs. And they were the faces of your players, and on the back of the coin it had a little bit of data. So one of these coins I have here is Mickey Mantle, who was my idol growing up. That little coin is worth like $72. If you have all 164 coins, they're anywhere from $2,000 or more for the set. Now, I had a shoebox full of these coins. I mean, imagine a shoebox full of these coins. Didn't know then that they were going to be worth something now. Didn't keep them. I only have these as a gift that someone gave me. These are 6 coins from the New York Yankees. But one day, here's the point of the story. One day, my brother and I got into an argument over our baseball cards. Like whose were what, and whose coins were what, and we're in this big. My mom finally said, "All right, that's enough. I'm taking all of them." So she took all the baseball cards and all the coins. I can remember that day. We just had built a family room on the back of our house, so we just were using it. And I'm laying on the couch, 10 years old, throwing the worst fit you can imagine because I can't have my baseball cards. I'm screaming, I'm crying, I'm all this stuff. Not only did it not get anywhere with my mom, she went about her business making dinner, the dinner that I was going to eat that night, as I pitched a fit and said I hated her and I hated my dad and all that stuff. She went away and made the dinner that I was going to have that night. Despite my complaining, she was going about blessing me with her grace. She didn't say, if that's where you're going to act, forget it. You're not having anything tonight. I'm going to eat by myself. She just went about making her dinner. And I sat down that night and had dinner like I had every other night. My mom was going about the process of giving me grace even as I'm yelling at her. And that's what's going on in this story. The Israelites are complaining. They don't like the food. They don't know where they're going to get food from. And all the while, God was in the process of showering them with all the food they could possibly want. And all they had to do was wake up in the morning and go get it. It was going to be showered around them, all around the camp where they were. Gratitude matters because it keeps in front of us God's grace, a reminder of his grace. And when we begin to complain, we lose all sight that God is always working on our behalf, always has us in his mind, and is always blessing us. Complaining just wipes that out. One more reason why it matters to God, and this is the last one here. This is found later in the story. Their complaining really was about God. So Moses said to the people, "Now in the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you'll see the glory of the Lord, because he's heard your grumbling against him." What he's saying is, at night when the quail comes in the morning when you see the manna laying on the ground that's bread for you, you'll know that God in his glory has been lovingly providing for you. Moses said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. And who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but you're grumbling against the Lord." The other last reason why gratitude matters to the Lord, it says there that our complaining reveals a deeper heart issue, which is they were complaining about God and how he was leading in their life. And they said, "We don't like it. Bring us out here in that forsaken area where there's nothing here, as far as you can see, but desolate area. We don't like how you're leading our lives." And that was at the root of their complaints. It wasn't against Moses. It wasn't Moses as a leader. It was God. And it says in the text, God has heard your complaint against him. You don't like what he's doing. And our complaining is like that too. Now, I want to note here as we move toward a kind of a takeaway. The Bible recognizes and understands there are times in our life when we're so frustrated and we pour our complaint out. But when we do that legitimately, and the Bible has many examples of that, it's when the complaint is taken to God and the heart is crying out and it's saying to God, "Don't you see? Aren't you going to help?" It's the plea of a child. But this is a grumbling of people who think that God has let them down, who thinks that God doesn't care, God doesn't want anything to do with them, that God's a bad leader. And though the complaining can sound similar, there's a world of difference, because the one is looking up and saying, "We need your help. Come and help us. You're our Father." The other one says, "We're complaining because you are a bad God and you're leading us in a bad way." And that's what they're doing. And our complaining reveals that part of our heart. If it's saying, "God, we can't trust you to lead us in a good way and to lead us to a good place because we don't think you care." And that's the part that God doesn't like. So let's go on to the next thing, our takeaway. I'd like you to take a moment now. If you look at your bulletin you got, and on the back it says message notes. There's a blank page there. I'd like you to take that, and if you've got a pencil, get a pencil out. If you don't have one, our ushers, we have some golf pencils that we can get you. I'd like you to write on that note page, write down one thing that's been a serious complaint for you, and a complaint where it's been frustration because, "God, I don't think you care. I think you're looking the other way." And you know in your heart that this has been a complaint about God. I want you to write that down there. And then, after we've given you a chance to do that, to pray through that. To pray about that complaint to the Lord. Because there's something that happens when we can honestly say, "Yeah, this is what's been in my heart, and Lord, I want to pray to you about it." So we're going to have it quiet and give you a few moments to do that. And if you need a pencil, just raise your hand and Don will get one for you. If you can want to write down some complaint that you know you've been harboring, and you know it's not been a complaint where you're seeking God as your Father. It's been a complaint because you think God's let you down in a big way. So write it there, and then after you write it down, pray through that for a moment, and then we'll move into kind of conclude things.